Good day. My name is Arnie Herz, and welcome to Habits of a Whole Heart on hmTv as part of the Humanity Matters series. This is episode number 2 with mediator Simeon Baum. Simeon has over 35 years of experience as a mediator, resolving thousands of disputes. He's also the trainer and has trained hundreds and hundreds of mediators, including myself, back in 1994. In episode number 1, we delved into Simeon's philosophy and spiritual practice in a very, very powerful session in which he effectively brought us through a awareness of meditation, self-awareness in such a way that opens up our ability to be receptive and to really hear what's happening within ourselves and with other people in order to make us very, very effective as human beings. Simeon is now here for episode number 2, and we're going to delve into more of the mechanics of a dispute and how to resolve it, because we all have disputes that we're dealing with all the time, whether it's a dispute with a car mechanic, with our spouse, with our kids, with a business partner, with political parties. We live in a world of constant conflict, and the ability to manage that conflict, to me, is the most important thing to be able to do to live life successfully with a sense of purpose and meaning and joy. So Simeon, thank you for being here in episode number 2. And one thing that really jumped out at me in episode number 1 is you shared your experience in that when you were at Horace Mann as a teenager in high school or middle school, that you came to understand the difference between being competitive and being collaborative, and how you reframed what it means to be successful instead of being the best of everyone, to help everyone be the best that we could be together, and how that shaped you. And then, of course, you shared about your Eastern Zen meditation practice and gave us an experience of that along with the Tao Te Ching. And you, other core point you've made up with Dr. Clark, who you met at Colgate, who shared with you the very powerful words when your mind was racing 1,000,000 miles a second, which is just to lie down and listen. So here you are now, mediator, after all these decades. And is there anything else that you would like to share about how you became a mediator? I mean, I'm assuming you didn't initially become a mediator, you were initially a lawyer, is that right?
Totally. Yeah, and you're right, Dr. Carter was a tremendous influence on me. And, you know, when I went to law school, I was kind of put off. I'd spent 7 years really struggling to shift from thinking about things in terms of good or bad, or right or wrong, or objective notions, objectifying things, to thinking more about what's happening inside a human being. That one of the things I learned from Dr. Carter in the comparative study of religion is we can look at the different religious traditions as isms or reifications. But instead, we could shift and say, well, let's just hear those expressions and see what's going on in the life of a human being, looking at persons as a locus for truth. So when I went to law school, our legal reasoning and our legal processes are very objectivist. Even Hegel said, you know, you've got law on the right, on the objective side, you've got, say, religion on the subjective side. But our interiority matters. What's happening inside matters for human beings, even if they're CEOs, even if they're pissed off in whatever dispute it is. And the way we resolve matters doesn't have to be binary, a winner and a loser, right or wrong. And our structures that we use in law. When I was in law school, saying we've got this framework and here's the outcome, and you're the winner, you're the loser, you're right, you're wrong. And I was like, this is not life. This is not reality. This is not how to bring out the best in oneself or in others. And then from that, I went from law school into litigation for 10 years. And I have to say, I could have been a corporate lawyer, less fight. but it was boring for me. Corporate law at this stage of life, I realize is very interesting. It's very important. But at the time, I liked the story, the narrative component that was in the life of a litigator. But still, the way you talk as a litigator to your adversary is not necessarily pleasant, depending on the framework that you're working in. Years later, when I became a mediator and learned about it, I realized actually you could be a very good lawyer and at the same time be civil with your counterpart. And frankly, in my view, the best lawyers are civil and collaborative even, because they have the strength to recognize I can be nice, but it doesn't mean you're going to get what you're trying to get if it doesn't make sense. We can still be nice. And we can have a lot of side fights over, procedural side fights or whatever, that can cost a lot of money, and we get pissed off at each other, and discovery battles and all the other things that happen in litigation. But that kind of wastes time and money and energy, and it creates friction. And if you're going to ultimately, as in most cases is the case, if you're ultimately going to try to negotiate to a resolution, you're much better off negotiating with somebody who has the possibility of trusting you, so they can open up and share something with you. So throughout that 10-year period, I was also uncomfortable that I was kind of forced into a way of thinking and interacting that was wasteful and not really getting to the heart. Then one day...
And it sounds like, too, that it also wasn't aligned with the you who was studying and practicing meditation and collaboration, that this was very antithetical to that.
Very. And it's funny, at the time I was also, did 15 years of Aikido, which is most recently developed Japanese classical martial art, where you don't conflict or confront force against force, but you blend and reorient and redirect the force of the other, and go with the flow. I know you had mentioned flow in our last episode. You go with the flow. And so one day, when I was at my deepest despair, I was then a litigator for reinsurance matters. And it's not the kind of stuff you talk to people about at cocktail parties, where underwriting files and actuarial files and claims files are the subject. And I saw a squib in the Law Journal for a mediation program. And when I learned about mediation, it was like a light bulb went off. And this was really much more consistent with who I wished to be. If the question is, who do you want to be? How do you want to be as a human being? How do you bring the most of the possibility in life? For me, I felt that the ability to be neutral, to not think in a box, the ability to not have to help one team against another, but to truly try to figure out what's going on, the ability to help everybody, the ability for a mediator who's not like a judge or an arbitrator making decisions that are imposed on others, but instead is a neutral, but not on nobody's side. The mediator is a neutral on everybody's side, an empathetic neutral. The ability to be empathetic, the ability to talk in a way where the conversation is human as opposed to rigid, and all of that stuff sung to me. And this is what I'd been kind of hoping, how I'd want to grow. And the role of the mediator was consistent with all of that. And one of the things that harkened back to my studies when I was in college was when you're studying comparative state religion, you don't have to think about an either or. Christianity's got the truth, or Judaism has the truth, or Buddhism has the truth, these isms, these things. No, you look at the traditions and the human beings, and everybody, it can be both and. We can all be in this together. We can all learn from one another. And the ability in mediation to hold the both and, the views of party A and the views of party B, and the challenges and life circumstances of everybody, to see it in living color, not in black and white either or, that was beautiful. So I don't know, Arnie, if that's making sense or
No, it makes total sense. You're gifted with this ability to understand what my grandmother used to say. And she used to say there's three sides to every story. There's yours, there's mine, and there's the truth. And being open to understanding not just the facts, but the emotions and the stories that each side is telling and the goals and the needs, and bringing that all together allows for a solution that is often so much more productive and life-enhancing and less destructive than the way we normally resolve it. And as you're talking about the litigation days, because I too was a litigator when I first started, and that litigation process was trained to see the flaws in the other side, to anticipate the flaws on your side, but to argue against them, and to create a narrative that was very focused and precise, as opposed to what you're doing as a mediator, which is really holding a container and opening it up. And I found as a mediator, and I learned this from you, is that oftentimes in a dispute, what people say they want and what they really want are two different things. Oftentimes what they say they want is to alleviate the emotional upset, their anger, their fear. The fear may be causing them to run away from a dispute. Their anger may be causing them to be entrenched in a dispute, to, as you said, calm them down, get them clear. What is it that I really want here? And now you've got the possibility of doing that. And also, of course, as a litigator, we're trained to be divisive, to be argumentative. And a lot of times, as we see as mediators, the clients have hired a gladiator who's adding fuel to the fire and costs and time in ways that are rarely in the client's best interests. And of course, when you find a collaborative lawyer, someone who's willing to work with you, changes everything. I've got two matters right now. One lawyer has a reputation of being, as I've already spoken to three other lawyers, the most difficult lawyer they've ever dealt with. Refuses to compromise, refuses to talk. Very difficult. And another person I just spoke to in a mediation dispute, both of us recognize that fighting is not in our client's respective interests, and we've committed to getting to a resolution through the help of mediation if we need it. So those are some thoughts I have.
It's so interesting, especially you, where you've got this litigator's background also. And now, working to help clients in whatever form or mode that is. There's been a growth and development in the field. I started mediation in the early 90s. And now here we are, really, 40 years later? I don't know. 30 years later, 40 years for me as a lawyer, 40 plus, but yeah, 30 something years later since that I've been in mediation. And the legal culture started to shift. As mediation's grown, there's also this notion, you use the word collaborative. As a lawyer, there is a field in law called collaborative law, where the lawyers actually follow some of the principles that are expressed in Fisher and Urey's book, Getting to Yes, the win-win solution, where it posits, and it's sort of the contemporary classic for negotiation. It's a shift from seeing negotiation with another party as an adversarial, games-playing competition, where you're talking at the other person, or you're manipulating them, or you're threatening them, or using ways to unbalance them so that you can capture all the value. Instead, Fisher and Urey's book suggests, no, you can actually be collaborative, work together, co-labor with the other lawyer, And you can struggle to be sharp intellectually, not on this is mine and that's yours, but on what's important to you. What are your interests? What are my interests? And how do we design options that are going to meet the interests of the other party and of ourselves? And if we can, the Pareto optimum, the richest potential deal is one that satisfies, meets the interests of all parties, not just one party. And that's creating value. I don't know if I got time for a story on this.
Yeah, but I want to hear the story. It's why I gave up litigation. When someone's in a dispute, I let my client know very clearly, I'm here to help you resolve the dispute, and if I can't, I'm going to refer it out to somebody else. Because a lawyer, where's the money's in the litigation? The money's not in resolving the dispute. If I resolve a dispute, it's a few $1,000s. If I litigate, it could be tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars. So a lot of lawyers, consciously or unconsciously, don't have an incentive to resolve the case. They have an incentive to fuel the fire. I know many people say that in a divorce context, you just tell your lawyer on day one that you'll give them 10% of your net assets and just resolve it in a week. And it's a little bit of a cynical thing, but there's a little bit of a truth to that for some lawyers. So this is also lining up our interests as lawyers with our clients. And oftentimes we're not necessarily really thinking about our client's best interest because we're lacking the emotional intelligence and awareness and sensitivity of what's happening, and we're just taking the flames and fueling them a little bit further. You have a story you want to tell.
Yeah, but listening to what you just said, Arnie, there's a book coming out of that Harvard negotiation project that getting to yeses from a subsequent book by a guy named Mnookin called Beyond Winning. He talks about three tensions in negotiation. There's creating and claiming value. You capture value or you generate value by expanding the pie. There's empathy and assertiveness. You can care about the other person or you can assert for yourself. And then there's also principal and agent tensions. And what you're describing is the principal and agent tension of the principal's client. The lawyer is the agent, but sometimes that agent takes over. And they're the champions, the gladiators, and they're costing it a fortune, not to the best interests of their clients. So what you do is, and the way you practice, is that you're aligning the interests of the principal and the agent more. So the story really goes more towards the creating and claiming tension. And there's these two sisters, very well-known story. I don't know, you probably know it already. But Susie and Sally. And one day their Uncle Sal hears Susie and Sally arguing, and he gets closer to listen. And they're arguing over a dozen oranges. And Susie's saying, they're mine. And Sally's saying, no, they're mine. And Uncle Sal, whose real name is Solomon, comes up with a solution. A person knowing King Solomon, the natural solution people might think is, okay, take the dozen oranges, split them in half, split the baby. But instead, he does what the King Solomon did really in the story. Because the King Solomon didn't cut the baby in half, he just threatened to do it. And he says to them, why? Why are you fighting over these oranges? And with that incisive sword of inquiry, he learns from Susie, I want the oranges to make orange juice. And Sally, I want the oranges in order to take the skin and make zest for a cake I want to make. And once he learns, one wants the pulp and one wants the skin, there's a different solution to that problem. And all of a sudden, what was 12 oranges from a distributive model, you divide it up, instead generated 24 items of value, 12 pulps and 12 skins. And every girl got 100% of what she wanted. So that's increasing value. That's creative as opposed to creating value. And we can do that. We can do it in mediations. We can do it in legal practice. It's a beautiful insight from Fisher and Urey, which I've often thought roots itself, since we are at the Holocaust Memorial, in a saying by, I believe it was Hillel, who said, which is, if I'm only for myself, what am I? No, if I'm not for myself, who will be? If I'm only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when? So we need to be both. I don't know how that strikes you.
Well, it's a great story, and I think about my own sort of approach to this in trying to figure out how to create value in different situations. I was sharing with my son, they're now talking about a Major League Baseball lockout. And you've got incredibly wealthy athletes and billionaire owners, and the real harm will be for the ushers and all the people working in the stadium and everyone whose life depends on the business of baseball. And eventually it will resolve. And early on in my career, when I was at Weil, the case I was on was the NFL Players Association against the NFL. And the case was fought for numerous years, and eventually it was resolved in a conference room. And partly of what allowed that to resolve is that the whole business model, everyone was fighting over how much of the pie they would get. But eventually people were convinced that the pie can be expanded 100-fold. I think in reality it's expanded 1,000-fold. One part of what I was doing was working with the economists to understand the business of football. And by making it much more collaborative between the players and the owners, we were able to create a league that had far greater financial potential. So it goes back to the expanding value. And a number of the mediations that I've worked on with parties in dispute, part of the way we were able to resolve it was to have an ongoing or a new business relationship that would generate value. And I think this goes down to the core thing. We see that oftentimes when people are in a dispute, they're stuck in an emotionally contracted place. And they're very angry, or they're very fearful, and that's what gets played itself out. There needs to be a shift in order to get people who are even open to mediation. They have to be willing, as you saw back in Horace Mann, to redefine winning. If winning is I win and you're conquered, I win and you lose, you're not going to be able to resolve the dispute. But if you can convince that person that they're going to be better off collaborating and they're going to get more of what it is they really want and really need, I think that's going to be a shift. And the other point is, as you know, I developed a series of programs called Legal Sanity, and it was a blog that I had called Legal Sanity.
Yeah.
And the essence of Legal Sanity was that one of the core points was that what we say we want and what we really want are two different things. Number two, when we realize what it is we really want, almost invariably, we can get that of what we really want and need. Not what we're greedy for, but what is it that I really need here to be able to move forward with my life or my business? And oftentimes, that's much easier. Getting people what they don't want is difficult. Getting people what they really need is different. And to also shift the dynamic to have gratitude, appreciation, and a refocus of what really matters in my life. Do I really want to spend the next 2-3 years fighting over this? Or is there a bigger point to my life?
So if I, triggered by what you've just said, Arnie, I remember when we were, I think, driving here earlier, you talked about how do you help parties who are in a ditch? They fall into a ditch. And you're talking about the emotionality and the entanglement that people have in disputes. And it reminds me of a Zen story, actually. This one monk, it was snowy outside, perfect for today, which is, loaded with snow. And one monk fell into the snow and said, help me. And the other monk ran over and fell into the snow along with him. And so it's a question, how do you help others help themselves, right? And And one of the things we do to help with the shift in a mediation is to be there with the people. Now, we could do this in a joint session. Everybody's talking together, and you help people. Himmelstein Friedman, the understanding-based school of mediation, they do this looping thing where they loop back what one party is saying, and the other party is listening, and they've expected it. Sometimes for mediators, we do it privately in breakouts, in caucuses. And you talk with a person, you do what they call active listening. Validate, empathize, clarify, summarize. Speak with them so they feel that they're deeply heard and understood. And when people hear that, that's when the interests come out. That's when the sense of the story, the life embeddedness, all of that comes out, the needs, their limitations, all that comes out. So for producing a shift, it's the paradoxical nature of change. We need to be able, and there's a great quote from the Tao Te Ching if I had time, which we don't, but we need to be able to let it happen. Let where they are be expressed and affirmed, and then change happens. So that helps with shifts. Now, what kind of change can happen? Super quickly, I think about one mediation, and it's emblematic of many, where people came into it thinking we're having an accounting proceeding because my partner's been cheating and stealing money from me, and the lawyers were smart, and they were kind of let the mediator do what needed to be done, talk privately with the parties. The originator of the company thought, what I want to do is, I wish I could take over the New York retail store where my partner is not giving me the dollars that are coming out of it. And the other party, the one who had that retail store, what she wanted to do was she wanted to go global with the mark. In the end, rather than figuring out, okay, what money was there in accounting proceeding, what they did was they reorganized their business. And she bought the whole brand. She licensed it back to him. He got to manufacture, take over the New York store, and she got to take the brand globally. So it was a richer deal, like Susie and Sally. And I think those 2 points, we got to be with the parties, help them express themselves fully as in their human reality, and then listen, and then see what the possibility is and help them generate the most rich deal they can.
Simeon, this is something that can be applied in all of our disputes. If you're a mediator and you're trying to have two of your kids resolve a dispute, or wherever context you're in, it starts with presence, listening, helping people align, figure out what the highest goals are. I know we're after time, but I would love to hear that Zen poem to close out episode number 2 here.
Okay, now which poem?
You were just saying that there's something you would read.
From the Tao Te Ching?
Yeah, or something you said you were going to read.
No, you're right. And I'm trying to remember which point I was looking at the time.
All right, well, what we're going to do is we're going to have you back for a third episode in a few months and share with people another level of wisdom, and we'll do that then. So I know we're after time here, and Simeon, I really want to thank you for your time here today, and once again, for sharing your wisdom, for embodying this wisdom, and I think it will be very beneficial for our listeners. And thank you for all you're doing to help resolve conflict in this world. It is a skill set that's desperately, desperately needed. And for our guests, thank you for tuning in. It really means a lot to everyone as part of the Humanity Matters series that you are tuning in, taking the time, forwarding the episodes to other people, and appreciating the wisdom that's coming forth through all of our podcasters. Once again, my name is Arnie Herz. This is Habits of a Whole Heart. My guest today, Simeon Baum, who's the president of Resolve Mediation Services. If you have a dispute that's protracted and you would like to get Simeon's help, mediators.com. Thank you for tuning in. Have a great day, and please follow us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple TV, and all the major outlets. Have a great day.